Joining me to discuss his experience at the White House Summit on Working Families, we have Speaker of the House, Paul Thissen. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Speaker.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with your experience in Washington, D.C. and what exactly did you bring to this panel?
Yeah, well, the White House Summit on Working Families really was focusing on what we can do together to make sure that that balance between making sure that people have enough time to work to put food on the table and the opportunities to do that, but also spend time with their kids around the kitchen table, that works together. And it was business leaders talking about what they do in their workplace to make sure that that can happen, and then policymakers as well. And the reason we were out there, I was out there, was to talk about some of the work we've done over the last 18 months here in Minnesota to address that issue, raising the minimum wage, passing the Women's Economic Security Act, and a number of other our investments in early childhood education to help families with that, so that people have opportunity to succeed, but they're also not letting their kids down, and we're not letting their kids down.
And as we talk about this opportunity to succeed, two areas that have been identified as key problems for working women in particular: Minnesota's third highest in the nation for childcare costs, and there's a significant lack of affordable housing. Now, the legislature did appropriate more funds for new housing and a bit towards daycare assistance, but do you think it went far enough to make any kind of an impact?
Well, I think the housing investment that we made in the last legislative session, $100 million in the bonding bill, by far the biggest investment we've ever made in affordable housing. I think that will have an impact, so I'm hopeful around that. But it is one of those very fundamental issues. I mean, we know that healthcare outcomes, education outcomes, all come back to whether you have stable housing, and so it's something we have to continue to work on. Our work isn't done there. And childcare, I mean, you're absolutely right that is one of the biggest challenges that we've heard as well. The third highest in the country is right. When I came in the legislature 12 years ago now, we were starting this series of budget deficits, that we've had going on until really this last biennium, where we finally fixed that structural balance. And in the course of that time, we really have drastically reduced the amount of assistance and help we provide families to afford child care. And we need to, I think in 2015, one of our top priorities will be to move the dial back so that families actually have access to high quality child care. Now, the stuff we did on early education, the $50 million we put into early education scholarships, they will help with some of that. But there is a significant amount of more work to do around that. And that doesn't help with 1, 2, and 3-year-olds.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to get your thoughts on this quote. Stephanie Coons argued in a recent New York Times commentary, social and economic policies constructed around the male breadwinner model have always disadvantaged women, but today they are dragging down millions of men as well. Paradoxically, putting gender equity issues at the center of social planning would now be in the interest of most men. To you, is this more of an issue of gender equity?
I think it's an issue of family equity. It's actually a great essay that she wrote, or article in the New York Times, an opinion piece, and I think she hit the nail on the head. I mean, another thing she said in that article that I think gets to this very point is, we've talked about a glass ceiling for a long time, which is, has been and continues to be an issue. But what we're finding more and more is a falling floor, and that doesn't just affect women. It affects men and kids and all families across Minnesota. Where we just don't have those supports in the workplace to allow them to succeed. And there's been a lot of discussion, even in this election season. I think there'll be a lot more about this idea of underemployment. I'm a little surprised that some of the folks, like Kurt Dowd, the Republicans, had just discovered this within the last 6 months, because it's been a reality for a decade, and Democrats have been working on these issues for a decade. So in some sense, I'm pleased that folks are kind of identifying this issue as something we have to focus on, but it's really making sure that people have opportunity, that when they're working a full-time job, they actually are getting the benefit of pay that you can raise a family on. It's also what the Affordable Care Act is about, right? Making sure that people have access to affordable health care insurance. The 180,000 Minnesotans that for the first time are getting access to affordable health care insurance as a result of that is helping, shore up that floor that has been falling for so many families for such a long time. So I hope this is really at the heart of what we talk about, not just in the 2015 legislative session, but really throughout this election season, because I truly do believe what you talk about in an election is what gets done in the next biennium.
The White House Summit, did you gain some insight, things that you intend to pull in come 2015 if you are indeed still in a majority position?
Yeah, no, I think, one of the things that was great being out there was able to tell Minnesota's story over the last couple months, where we did pay equity, probably the strongest pay equity law that is in the United States and raised the minimum wage to $9.50 and took care of caregivers and making sure that they weren't discriminated against in the workplace. A couple things that I would like to see, and I think will be on our agenda for next year: earned sick leave, making sure that when people are sick or their kids are sick, that they're not going to lose a lot of money and sometimes get fired as a result of that. So we want to move in that direction. I think this issue around childcare and making sure we improve the supports for childcare is going to be something that we're going to want to do in the next legislative session. I think that talking more and more about pregnancy leave that's paid so kids get the right start is something that I don't know if that's something we can do in 2015, but should be part of the conversation going forward. And then the last thing is kind of at the other end of the scale, which is retirement security for middle class and lower income families. You know, a big worry for a lot of families, and when we get there, you know, a big cost on the state, quite frankly. So if to the extent that we can kind of look at all of those pieces of what used to be kind of the social contract that we've had among ourselves as Americans, where if people are going to work a full-time job and do the right thing, they should be able to take care of their kids and they should be able to retire with dignity. We need to get back to that, and that's been falling away.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, by the time this program airs, the President's two-day visit to Minnesota will be complete. But I'd like your opinion. Do you think this is more of a federal issue, or is the most impact that can be made, does that need to be done at the state level?
Well, I think it's both a federal and a state issue, but the reality is today it's the states where the action is taking place. If you look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. with the gridlock and the inability to move forward really on agendas on anything whatsoever, where we're going to see the action in the next several years is going to be at the state level, and I think Minnesota is over the last 2 years really been a model for that, and I hope that we're going to be able to continue that in the future.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, as always, thank you for your time, and thanks for coming in to the Capitol Report studio on such a busy day. We appreciate it.
Thank you.